goes there. And there's a shoulder screw that holds those two pieces in place here. Check that they're free to move. Something's not sitting right. Oh, it's that spring. Okay, so the spring here is trapped underneath. Needs to come over the top. There, like that. Now something's still not quite right. Something's binding here. That lever is in the wrong place. That should be right over here somewhere. Which means that that's in the wrong place. It should latch into two, open or closed. It doesn't really want to stay in the open position. To find out what's going on there, I suspect one of these levers is slightly distorted and rubbing on something. That arm there, I'm not convinced by the shape of that. After a bit of mucking around, I've got everything correctly aligned. Basically everything was in there correctly, except I didn't have this rod running up between those two pins, which guides it in position. I suspect too that this rod is slightly bent and may even be rubbing somewhere where it's not supposed to be. But it does clip neatly into the open and the closed position now, and as you can see, when you release it, it pops back to the closed position without any problem at all. So that looks good. So I'm quite happy with the operation of that mechanism. That's our preview mechanism, if you like, for using the ground glass screen on the Linhof. That part's good. Now I've got to turn my attention to getting the flash sync mechanism back into position, and then all those extra levers that appeared to be all over the place for the shutter release. So I'll prepare for that. Right, let's carry on with the shutter. Now here's the gear that drives the, here's the little sector gear that drives this wheel, which drives the pallets for the flash sync. So I'll just put a tiny touch of molybdenum paste on the shaft of that. That sits in there like that, couples with this pallet wheel, and you can probably see those pallets ratcheting backwards and forwards there as I move that. Now this gear, put a touch of molybdenum pasted in the centre of that. Now I think from memory that there was a spring that went under that. Am I right? Let's pop that in position. Now we've got to get these two meshed together correctly. and that has to be in a certain position, and it's not there. Push that all the way there, can I get that? Okay. Just consulting my diagram here. No, that's not quite right. I can pull this lever in it and disengage that. I want to come back that way a tooth or so, I think. How does that look? No, a bit more I need. No. Is that it? That is where I started, with that included angle there. Now I'll hook its spring over the post. That post, I decided that tab on the end of the post was supposed to be sitting over that pin, and so I've repositioned it so it was in fact sitting over that pin. And I think that tab is sole purpose in life is to stop this tab with the hook on it from being able to revolve and move. That looks okay. I think I'm just about ready to put my flash sync lever back in place. My flash contact could go in place. It sits into the body casting, or the case, the shutter case that sits into, and the screw for that. Since I've rattled this container around and I've lost everything I had carefully, neatly laid out, things are not carefully laid out anymore. That's alright, we're closing in on it. That's our flash contact back in position, our fixed flash contact. The moving flash contact will sit here, and that will sit on top of it, and then the top plate will hold that down. I'll pop that to one side because I'm not sure I'm ready to deal with that yet. Let's just check we haven't fouled anything up. Putting those pieces in place. No, that looks good. I have to be careful with the positioning of my parts now because I've got a few oddities here that I'm not familiar with. Alright, with our flash contact in place and its bush on the top, and this is our high speed spring, that's sitting on its post. Our cover here needs to go in position. Now these arms, this arm needs to come behind that flash contact there. This is going to take some weaving to get these pieces in, I think. Like that. That bush needs to go in there. Like that. That looks suspiciously correct. A single screw at this end. Now something's just jumped, something's not seated correctly. It's at this piece. This arm, is that on the wrong side? It might be on the wrong side of this piece. I'm a bit concerned about this bounce. It suggests that this lever, I've had this before with these shutters. This lever here needs to pull back a bit and it sits behind this edge. That's it. Gets trapped underneath. That's sitting better. Check that flash contact is correctly positioned. It's got to be over there. The bush has to be there. I'm just going to run that screw down. This screw holds the lever in position too normally, but I'm just going to run it down without the lever so that I can see if everything's going to sit correctly. That's in position, that moves, this is moving. That looks right. That moves. Yes. That does look correct. Something wasn't sitting down correctly there, and that was what was this lever here was not sitting correctly over its home. Alright, well that looks hopeful. I'll take that screw back out, we'll put its lever on there now. The lever that goes on there is the flash sync lever. And there's a detent spring that goes on there. Let's tighten that screw up. And the detent spring, I can fit the detent spring I suppose. That has to be wriggled into position. It's a slightly cursed sort of a thing. So one of those jobs that takes two pairs of tweezers and then some good eyesight to spot the spring after it disappears off across the workshop at high speed. Can it be done? That end's in. This end needs to come over behind that post. That's my detent. That's my detent for my flash sync lever. And the flash sync lever is now in place. Its screw's done up. The screw at this end is done up. So that part is good. And I'm running out of levers. I've only got a handful of levers left to go back on the shutter. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Does this still work? Yes, it does. It's a flash contact make. Yes, it does. Just making sure that the flash contact's not scraping on this arm, so that it just pulls across neatly. It doesn't rub on it and cause some friction which would stop it moving smoothly. Alright, so far so good. What's next? Next, I think I want to get this spring in position. And how does that go? A piece of it stuck up in the air, didn't it? Like that. It's got to go over that post. This arm needs to come behind here, like that. Okay. That's fairly easy. Suspicious. It's always suspicious when things go smoothly. Now the shutter release arm, that needs to go on next. I'm just giving this a wipe where you can't see me doing this, but I'm just cleaning this with a bit of naphtha because it's a bit grimy. Now the shutter release lever, that must fit there. And it must have a return spring. That's the return spring. What's it doing way under there? Okay. Put that back where it came from. Okay, so now I've got the return spring correctly positioned on here and correctly positioned on here. Here's my high-speed spring. What goes next? Well, the next piece of the puzzle was this thing. That lever. And this would be its return spring here. It seems to sit there well enough. Well, the next piece of the puzzle is this one. Now there's a spring hanging off this here. Which actually rotates right around that side. That's held in position with a single screw. Let's pop that into place. Check that the lever moves smoothly, it does. And then there's two levers that go on top of that lever. And I'm working from photos I've taken here. So I've got to try and nut out where all these springs connect up to, which piece goes where. That's the top piece. The bottom piece must be that one. And a spring couples up to that, but it's not that spring. So where is it? Oh, here it is. It's this thing here that's fallen off the back of that piece. Okay, well I've got to take this off again. I've dropped a spring off the back of it while I've been lifting it into place, or while I've been cleaning it. But here, oh, this is not looking good. This goes on here either like this, or the other way. I'll try it like this first. It can only go on one of two ways. That spring must be over those posts. And the spring is almost symmetrical, but not quite symmetrical. So it might be a challenge deciding if I've got this the right way up. Of course, I just need an extra challenge at the moment. I'm already struggling with this piece. I'll get this screw in position and then I'll see if the springs appear to make sense. That spring couples to the other levers, which I haven't got in place yet. This is the first lever to go on. It goes on there, and a spring couples to that. And is it that one? I think it might be. And this piece goes on the top, and this spring couples to that. I can see that. And this is it. Now I think that springs on back to front that I've put on there before. It needs to come right round to here underneath. Take this off. All this is just time consuming, but no harm done, as long as I don't lose anything. If I lose the bloody spring, there'll be hell to pay. Now I reckon it went that way up. Now it's come off its post underneath here again. Just trying to figure out if I've got this the right way up. I'm not convinced that I do. I'll be back when I've figured this one out. Well, the inevitable happened. The spring took off for the to try and get to the corner of the room as quickly as it could. Fortunately, it didn't get quite that far, but I had to completely put everything away that I in the near vicinity, shake it out, make sure everything was gone, until I came back and started clearing around the area, and I did find the spring in the end. I've got a whopping great magnet here that I used to use on my welding bench, and it's great for finding springs, and it did find the spring for me, and I did get the springs correctly positioned in their various places so that the levers are all sprung loaded exactly as they should be. But now I've got to put my main cocking ring in place, and then hopefully all of this will work. I'm running out of time, so I might not do that today. Well, it's the next day. As you can see, the shutter's closed up and it certainly functions, but it's, you know, I was saying that you don't normally need to muck with the retard gear train, because if it had been set accurately before, once the shutter was clean again, that the speeds would be accurate once more. Well, in this case, the speeds are running quite clearly a little bit fast. So what's happened there? What I suspect has happened, of course I've got no proof of this, is that someone attempted to adjust the speeds at some time in the past, and they did that without first servicing the shutter. Now, it's absolutely futile to try and get a shutter working correctly without going the whole 9 yards and servicing it first, because you'll never get reliable action otherwise. So normal practice is, if the speeds are off, it's a sign that the shutter needs to be serviced, and you service the shutter first and then you adjust the speeds. I suspect that someone didn't do that, that they just discovered that the shutter was running a little bit slow, because it probably desperately needed to be serviced, and thought that they could adjust the speeds to compensate. And they've probably moved the retard gear train, and perhaps it worked relatively well for them with their dirty shutter and their mispositioned retard gear train. But it doesn't work well now that the shutter's cleaned and serviced and working properly again. It means that the shutter's just running quickly. So I'm going to have to open this back up and adjust the speeds to get this running correctly. First, I'm going to go away to my shutter speed tester and just make a note of the speeds that I'm getting. I can certainly tell that the 1/10 of a second here is somewhat fast, the 25th I suspect, and the 5th and so forth I certainly think are fast. But I need to see that on the machine and get a fair idea of how far out that actually is, and also check the speeds at the faster end of the range, where of course I just can't tell by eye or by ear what I'm getting there. The machine will tell me. Right, back later. That was very instructive. I've done my tests. So at the 1 second speed, it's running about 3/4 of a stop too fast. At the 5th, much the same. At the 10th, about a stop too fast. At the 25th, it was on the money, it was good. At the 100th, it was okay. It was just on the fast side of the line. I certainly wouldn't complain about that, within 10% I would have said. At the 200th and at the 400th, it delivers exactly the same speed as if it was set to a 100th. So there are certainly problems here to be dealt with. It should be entertaining. The day is finally done. The shutter is working quite well now. I'm quite happy with the speeds. The slower speeds are all quite appropriate. The fastest speeds are good until you get to the 200ths. Now the 200th is much more like a 1/250th. It's a 1/25. It's much slower than a 200th. And the 400th certainly doesn't give you a 400th. It gives you somewhere probably around a 1/200th of a second. Slightly faster than that perhaps, and that's it. But that's how I was able to determine how fast I was able to get the shutter to actually function, was I removed the retard gear train completely so that there was nothing obstructing the high speed. And then I was able to test the shutter, and of course as long as the 400th of a second wasn't selected, it would be running at its 200th of a second speed, and that's how I was able to determine how fast it was possible to get the shutter to work. And with the 400th of a second selected, of course, it brings into play the second spring, and I was able to determine how fast I could possibly get it to work on the 1/400th of a second position. And the limitation on those speeds would be that in the main, the tension of the springs. The main spring on the cocking ring, that determines how fast the shutter would normally run. And the secondary spring, which is engaged for the high speed, that determines how much extra force it would apply to the cocking ring to allow for the high speed. I'm fairly confident that that's as good as I'm going to get this thing, there being no parts of course, but the shutter does work reliably now, and I'm very happy with the speeds. I was having a great deal of trouble getting a reliable 1 second out of it, and that seems to be working very well now. I was struggling to get there. It was either running too fast, and the alternative was it wasn't running at all. But I had the retard gear train out, put that through the ultrasonic cleaner, blew it all out, lubricated it with graphite powder, put it back in the shutter, and everything appears to work quite well now, or as well as it's ever going to. So there's a nice big Linhof, or a shutter for a Linhof camera. This is a Synchro Compur shutter, a big one. I think it's a size 1. I hope I don't see another one in the near future. Thanks for watching.